I would like to read something which I had deleted. So,
Yes.
here. I would like to. I also would like to tell you, if you have followed me this far, to accept my statement about my other memories under the sodium pentothal which returned. That world was a prison. It was dreadful. We overthrew it, just as we overthrew the Nixon tyranny, but it was far more cruel, incredibly so, and there was a great battle and loss of life. Now to continue. It was in February of 1974 that my blocked-off memories of Track A returned, and it was in February of 1974 that my novel, Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, was released finally, after two years' delay. It was almost as if the release of the novel, which had been delayed so long, meant that in a certain sense it was all right for me to remember. That is, to remember that the book was not fiction. The book was based on subliminal memories which I had of such a world. But perhaps until the book was actually released, it was better that I did not remember. Why that would be, I do not know. But I have the impression that the memories were not to come to the surface until the material had been published very sincerely on the author's part as what he believed to be fiction. Perhaps, had I known, I would have been too frightened to write the novel. As it was, I was very frightened anyway. There was something about the novel that frightened me a great deal. Or perhaps I would have just shot off my mouth and told everybody and somehow interfered with the effectiveness of that book and such other books of mine as Man in the High Castle, which were also based on residual memories. The effectiveness of those novels might have been impaired. I do not even claim there was an intended effectiveness. Perhaps there was none at all. But if there was one, and I repeat the word if emphatically, it was almost certainly to stir subliminal memories in readers back to dim life. Not a conscious life, not an entering consciousness, as in my own case, but to recall to them on a deep and profound, albeit unconscious level, what a police tyranny is like, and how vital it is, now or then, at any time, along any time track, in any world, to defeat it. In March of 1974, the really crucial moves to depose Nixon were beginning. In August, 5 months later, they proved successful. It seems to me that in many ways, ideas have a life of their own. They appear to seize on people and make use of them. The idea which seized me 27 years ago and never let go of me is this: any society in which people meddle in other people's business is not a good society, and a state in which the government, quote, knows more about you than you know about yourself, as it is expressed in my novel Flow My Tears, the Policeman Said, is a state which must be overthrown. It may be a theocracy, a fascist corporate state, or reactionary monopolistic capitalism, or centralistic socialism. That aspect does not matter. And I am saying not merely it can happen here, meaning the United States, but rather it did happen here, meaning the United States. I remember I was one of the secret Christians who fought it, and at least to some extent helped overthrow it. And I am very proud of that, proud of myself in Time Track A.
This is going a few questions.
I will add that. When I use the word Christian there, I do not mean Christians as they are now. I mean Christians as they were, say, 2,000 years ago, enemies of a powerful empire. When I saw Star Wars this morning, I thought to myself, déjà vu. There is, unfortunately, for me, a somber intimation which accompanies my pride in the work that I did in that alternate Earth. I think that in that previous world, I did not live past March of 1974. In this track here, which I will call Track B, we fought a much lighter tyranny, a far stupider one. Or perhaps we had assistance, the anterior reprogramming of one or more historical variables came to our rescue. Sometimes I think, and this is of course pure speculation, a happy fantasy of my soul, that because of what we accomplished there, or anyhow attempted to and very bravely, we who were directly involved were allowed to live on here, past the terminal point which brought us down in that other worse world. It is a sort of miraculous kindness. This gracious gift serves to delineate for us, for me at least, some aspects of the programmer. It causes me to comprehend him after a fashion. I think we cannot know what he is, but we can experience his functioning, and so can ask, what does he resemble? Not what is he, but rather what is he like? First and foremost, he controls the objects, processes, and events in our space-time world. This is, for us, the primary aspect, although intrinsically he may possess aspects of greater magnitude but of less applicability to us. I have spoken of myself as a reprogrammed variable, and I have spoken of him as the programmer and reprogrammer. During a short period of time in March of 1974, at the moment in which I was re-synthesized, I was aware perceptually, which is to say aware in an external way of his presence. At that time I had no idea what I was seeing. It resembled nothing that I had ever heard described. It resembled plasmic energy. It had colors. It moved fast. It collected and then dispersed. But what it was, what he was, I am not sure even now, except I can tell you that he had simulated normal objects and their processes so as to copy them, and in such an artful way as to make himself invisible within them. As the Vedantists put it, he is the fire within the flint, the razor within the razor case. Later research showed me that in terms of group cultural experience, the name Brahman has been given to this omnipresent, immanent entity.
Ceux qui suivent le culte Veda diraient...
One thing I really want you to know. I am aware that the claims I am making, claims of having retrieved buried memories of an alternate present and to have perceived the agency responsible for arranging that alternation, these claims can neither be proved nor can they be even made to sound rational in the usual sense of the word. It has taken me over 3 years to reach the point where I am willing to tell anyone but my closest friends about my experience beginning back at the vernal equinox of 1974. One of the reasons motivating me to speak about it publicly at last, to openly make this claim, is a recent encounter I have undergone, which, by the way, bears a strange resemblance to Hawthorne Abinson's experience in my novel The Man in the High Castle with the woman Juliana Frink. Juliana read Abinson's book about a world in which Germany and Japan and Italy... Now this is a little difficult if you haven't read the book, but he wrote a novel in which Germany, Italy, and Japan lost World War II, and he was living in a world in which they had won World War II. Juliana read Abinson's book about a world which the Axis lost, and she felt she should tell him what she comprehended about the book. In other words, that his novel was true. Now, this final scene in Man in the High Castle has been the source for a similar scene in my later story, Faith of Our Fathers, where the girl Tanya Lee shows up and acquaints the protagonist with the actual reality situation, which is to say that much of his world is delusional and purposefully so. In other words, it's a common theme in my writing that a dark-haired girl shows up at the door of the protagonist and tells him that his world is delusional, that there's something false about it. Now, in Man in the High Castle, the situation is ironically reversed. The girl that comes to the door tells an author that his book of fiction is true. For several years, I have had the feeling, a growing feeling, that one day a woman who would be a complete stranger to me would contact me and tell me that she had some information to impart to me, and then she would appear at my door just as Juliana appeared at Hawthorne Abinson's door, and that forthwith, in the gravest possible way, she would tell me exactly what Juliana told Abinson, and that is that my book, like his, was in a certain real, literal, and physical sense not fiction but the truth. Well, this did finally happen to me. I even knew that her hair would be black. I had an actual complete sense of what she would look like and what she would say. And I am speaking of a woman who had systematically read every single novel of mine, which is more than 30 novels, as well as many of my stories. She did appear. She was a total stranger, and she did inform me of this fact, that some of my fictional works were in a literal sense true. Now, I had posited in 1974, when my memories of this alternate world came back, that if these memories were authentic, that it was only a matter of time before a contact, a cautious, guarded probing by someone would occur, initiated by a person who had read my books and for one reason or another deduced the actual situation. I mean, knew what the significant information was which the books and stories carried. Now, this woman knew from my novels and stories which world I had experienced, which of the many. What she could not determine until I told her was that in February of 1975, I had passed across into a third alternative present, a third one, track C, we will call it. And this was a garden or park of peace and beauty, a world superior to ours, rising into existence. To her, of three rather than two worlds. The black iron prison world, which had been our intermediate world in which oppression and war exist but have to a great degree been cast down, and then a third alternative world which someday, when the correct variables in our past have been reprogrammed, will materialize as a superimposition onto this one, and within which, as we awaken to it, we shall suppose that we had always lived there. The memory of this intermediate one, like that of the black iron prison world, eradicated mercifully from our memories. The best that I can really do at this point, after having had these experiences and written these novels, is to play the role of prophet, of ancient prophets and such oracles as the Sibyl at Delphi, and to talk of a wonderful garden world, much like that which once our ancestors are said to have inhabited. In fact, I sometimes imagine it to be exactly that same world restored, as if a false trajectory of our world will eventually be fully corrected, and once more we will be where once, many thousands of years ago, we lived and were happy. During the brief time I walked about in that garden world, I had the strong impression that it was our legitimate home which somehow we had lost. The time I spent there was short, about 6 hours of real elapsed time, but I remember it well. In the novel I wrote with Roger Zelazny, Deus Irae, I describe it toward the end, at the point where the curse is lifted from the world by the death. Most amazing to me about this park-like world, this track C, was the non-Christian elements forming the basis of it. It was not what my Christian training had prepared me for at all. Even when it began to phase out, I still saw sky, I saw land and dark blue smooth water, and standing by the edge of the water, a beautiful nude woman whom I recognized as Aphrodite. At that point, this other, better world had diminished to a mere landscape beyond a golden rectangle doorway. The outline of the doorway pulsed with laser-like light, and it all grew smaller and was at last gone from sight. The 3 to 5 doorway, devouring itself into nothingness, sealing off what lay beyond. I have not seen it since, but I had the firm impression that this was the next world, not of the Christians, but the Arcady of the Greco-Roman world, something older and more beautiful than that which my own religion can conjure up as a lure to keep us in a state of dutiful morality and faith. What I saw was very old and very lovely. Sky, sea, land, and the beautiful woman, and then nothing, for the door had shut, and I was closed off back here. It was with a bitter sense of loss that I saw it go, saw her go, really, since it all constellated about her. Aphrodite, I discovered when I